countries that will die soon. The truth is, when America sneezes, these nations catch a full-blown cold. It's not just a little sniffle. We're talking economic collapse, currency crashes, and political chaos. And while we all know the US economy has a way of shaking the world, some countries are so intertwined with America that a recession here could feel like a financial apocalypse for them. From nations relying heavily on trade relations to others deeply invested in the US financial systems, this economic domino effect could leave them scrambling. Their fiscal policies would be torn apart, their financial systems unraveled, and their economies could fall into economic collapse faster than you can say job loss. We're not just talking about developing countries. Even some established markets would feel the heat, with their global economy teetering on the brink. Curious which countries might face total collapse if the US goes into a recession? This video will break it all down, highlighting how economic instability can lead to a massive geopolitical impact. So buckle up, and let's dive into the economic mess these countries are in. You won't want to miss it. Hit that like button and subscribe now to stay ahead of the curve. Let's dive in. Number 10. Turkey. Turkey's economy is like that friend who insists on staying out until 3 a.m. It's a wild ride, and you're never really sure if it'll survive the next morning. If the US sneezes, Turkey catches a full-blown flu. And here's why. It's pretty much financially handcuffed to America. No, seriously. It's like a financial reality show where the stakes are way too high, and Turkey is hanging on by a thread. You see, Turkey relies heavily on exports to the US. Think electronics, textiles, and automotive parts. That's right, all those stylish scarves and top-of-the-line Turkish carpets, they're not just destined for the tourists, they're bound for US shelves. So when the US slows down, Turkey's exports suffer faster than a pizza delivery gone wrong. In fact, in 2024, the US was Turkey's second-largest trading partner, accounting for around $32 billion in exports. You can almost hear Turkey's economy cringing every time the US coughs up a recession. Now, if the US sneezes, Turkey's foreign investments, especially from American firms, will start packing their bags faster than you can say economic instability. And we're not talking about pocket change here. American investments play a critical role in the Turkish economy, particularly in sectors like energy, construction, and manufacturing. These sectors fuel jobs, economic growth, and, let's be honest, the national sense of, we're doing just fine. But when America goes into recession mode, foreign investors tend to run for the hills, clutching their portfolios like they're holding the last cookie in the jar. That's not even the worst of it. The real kicker? The Turkish lira. If the US economy tanks, the lira could face a new set of issues. The Turkish lira is already more fragile than a house of cards in a hurricane, and with a $450 billion debt burden and deep reliance on foreign investment, it would only take a nudge from a global recession to send it spiraling. In fact, in the last few years, the lira has already lost around 80% of its value against the dollar. A US recession could see the lira tumble even further, making everyday goods in Turkey more expensive than trying to get a table at a fancy restaurant on Valentine's Day. So let me ask you this. How long do you think Turkey's economy could survive with fewer exports and fleeing investments? Yeah, not long. But hey, at least they've got some incredible food and a killer tourist industry to distract from the economic chaos, right? Number 9. India. India's economy is like a Swiss Army knife. It's versatile, diverse, and can handle a lot of things at once. But here's the catch. Even the most multi-tool knife can't survive if you're constantly relying on one blade to cut through everything. And guess which blade India's economy is leaning on? You guessed it, the US. The US is India's major trade partner, and we're talking about billions of dollars here. In fact, in 2024, the US accounted for a hefty $129.2 billion in trade with India. That's right, over $120 billion worth of goods and services exchanged between the two countries. But don't pop the champagne yet, because a US recession would quickly turn that sweet trade relationship sour. Here's why. Demand for Indian exports would plummet. It's like having a super popular Instagram account, but suddenly, your followers stop liking your posts. So, what happens when US demand for products like information technology, textiles, and pharmaceuticals drops? Well, India's economy might as well be the one getting tagged in the comment section of a financial meltdown. Let's break it down. India's information technology sector is a major player in its economy, and most of it is built around outsourcing services for American companies. When American companies start tightening their belts, cutting budgets, or, let's face it, panicking about a recession, the first thing they do is cut back on IT outsourcing. The demand for Indian tech services? Gone faster than the last slice of pizza at a party. And we're talking about a $150 billion industry that employs millions of people. Imagine a bunch of programmers staring at their screens, waiting for a project that isn't coming. Ouch. Then there's the textiles industry. India is one of the largest producers of textiles in the world, and guess where a huge chunk of its products go? That's right, the US. But a recession means fewer people buying clothes, which means less demand for those stylish kurtas and comfy cotton shirts. And since India's textile industry accounts for a huge portion of its manufacturing exports, this slump could throw millions of workers into economic uncertainty. Oh, and don't forget about pharmaceuticals. India is the world's largest supplier of generic drugs, and guess where a significant chunk of those pills goes? The US. A recession would not only shrink the demand for these drugs, but also reduce the money flowing into the pharmaceutical sector. Picture this: factories shutting down, jobs disappearing, and the government scrambling to balance the books. So, can India survive a US recession? Sure, it's more diversified than a lot of countries, but if the US sneezes, India might just end up with a fever. It's the kind of fever that comes with fewer jobs, fewer exports, and less growth. And no amount of chai can fix that. Number 8. Australia. Australia's economy isn't exactly a tightrope walk, but a US recession would definitely make it feel like one. Picture this: Australia, a sunny land of beaches, kangaroos, and economic dependence on the US. Sounds a bit less glamorous when you realize that the US is one of Australia's biggest trading partners, right? A recession in the US means an Australian economic hangover, and it's not just about having too many Fosters on a Friday night. Take coal, for example. Yes, the stuff that powers your home, or at least some of the world's homes, and is dug up in massive quantities from Australian mines. A good chunk of this coal is exported to the US. But guess what happens when the US goes into recession? Industrial production drops, and suddenly, coal demand from the US does too. So now, Australia's sitting on a pile of coal that's worth less than it was yesterday. Makes you want to grab a shovel and start digging for some extra cash, right? But hold up, coal isn't the only thing keeping Australia afloat. Agricultural exports, we're talking about everything from beef to wine, are also pretty dependent on the US market. And you can imagine how thrilled Australia would be if American consumers suddenly pulled the brakes on their grocery carts. A recession means fewer beef patties on the barbecue, fewer bottles of Australian Shiraz hitting shelves, and less money flowing into the Aussie economy. Not exactly a recipe for financial success, is it? Now, let's throw in the tourism industry, an area that gets a solid boost from American visitors. I mean, who doesn't want to snap a selfie with a kangaroo and watch the Sydney Opera House at sunset? But when the US economy tanks, Americans are going to start cutting back on their expensive trips. They'll cancel those flights to Sydney faster than you can say, "G'day." In fact, around 1.5 million Americans visit Australia every year, and they spend a lot of cash. A US recession would hit those tourist dollars right where it hurts, straight in the wallet. Fewer Americans visiting means less cash flowing into hotels, restaurants, and souvenir shops. So here's the million-dollar question. How long can Australia keep its economy in check when its biggest exports and tourism industry are hanging by a thread? Not long, folks. An American recession would put Australia in a financial chokehold, and it wouldn't just be the kangaroos feeling the squeeze. Number 7. South Korea. South Korea's economy is basically a high-speed train powered by smartphones, semiconductors, and fancy cars. But here's the twist. That train is heavily reliant on American demand. A US recession? Well, that train is going to slam into a brick wall. And it's going to be loud, messy, and totally avoidable if we didn't have this whole interconnected world economy thing happening. Let's start with the obvious: smartphones. You know those Samsung Galaxy phones everyone loves to upgrade every year? Yeah, they don't just magically appear on store shelves, they're made in South Korea. And guess where a lot of those phones go? That's right, to the US, where American consumers gobble them up like candy. But when the US economy shrinks, so does American spending. Suddenly, those Galaxy phones become a lot less shiny when people start counting their pennies. South Korea will be sitting there with all this high-tech gear wondering why nobody is picking it up. Sales slump, factories slow down, and jobs? Well, they take a hit too. Now let's talk semiconductors, the unsung heroes of the modern world. They power everything, your computer, your car, your refrigerator. And guess who makes most of them? South Korea. In fact, it's home to the world's largest semiconductor manufacturer, Samsung Electronics. Now, while semiconductors are critical to the global economy, the demand for them is heavily driven by places like the US, where tech companies need these chips for everything from computers to iPhones. A downturn in the US economy means tech companies cut back on their orders. And guess who feels the pain? You guessed it, South Korea. Those factories might as well close down their lights because no one's buying. But wait, it gets better. South Korea also produces automobiles. Remember Hyundai and Kia? The ones that seem to always have a sweet deal going on? Guess where a significant chunk of their cars end up? You guessed it again, America. The US is one of the largest markets for South Korean vehicles. But when Americans start tightening their belts, guess what's the first thing they stop buying? Cars. I mean, who needs a new ride when you're busy worrying about your job security, right? So South Korea's automobile industry would tank, along with everything else. The kicker? South Korea's economy is so reliant on exports to the US that a recession there would ripple through almost every sector. It's like that friend who spends all their savings in the first month of a trip and then wonders why they can't afford the last leg of their journey. So here's a fun thought. How long can South Korea keep its engine running when its biggest markets decide to park the car? Not long. South Korea would be left in the dust, and it's going to take more than a few tech innovations to pull them out of the economic wreckage a US recession would cause. Number 6. Japan. Japan might have the world's fastest trains, but if the US sneezes, Japan's economy could derail faster than you can say Shinkansen. As one of Asia's largest economies, Japan has long relied on the US for trade, investment, and let's face it, customers for all the cool tech gadgets and cars we can't resist. But when the US catches a cold, Japan gets a full-blown fever. And it's not pretty. Let's start with technology. Japan is home to some of the world's top tech companies, from Sony to Panasonic, and its innovative gadgets are practically the stuff of legends. But guess who buys a huge chunk of all those TVs, cameras, and gaming consoles? You got it, the US. But if the American economy stalls, guess what happens to the demand for Japanese electronics? People stop upgrading their phones, buying new TVs, or investing in the latest PlayStation. Suddenly, Japan's tech giants are sitting on a mountain of unsold inventory, wondering why everyone's suddenly more interested in saving money than spending it on the latest gadgets. But don't think Japan's immune just because they make cars too. Oh no, Toyota, Honda, and Nissan all rely on the US for a massive chunk of their sales. In 2024, 1.3 million Japanese cars hit American roads. So when Americans tighten their belts and start keeping their old cars a little longer, you can bet Japan's car manufacturers will be slamming on the brakes. The US isn't just buying cars, it's buying a good chunk of Japan's manufactured goods. And without those sweet export dollars flowing in, Japan's economy would start to feel like a Toyota with no gas. But here's the kicker. Japan's economy doesn't just rely on trade. It's deeply linked to US investment too. American firms pour billions into Japan, propping up its industries and stock markets. What happens when those investments dry up? Japan's economy would suddenly look like a low-budget anime. Not much action, and certainly not much of a happy ending. Reduced investments, fewer exports, and a shrinking economy could throw Japan into an economic tailspin. So can Japan survive a US recession? Not without a few serious bumps along the way. The land of the rising sun would watch its technological marvels gather dust and its cars sit in unsold lots while its stock market takes a dive. It's not a pretty picture, and it's one Japan would rather avoid. We're halfway through the countdown, and things are only going to get juicier. If you are enjoying the video so far, hit the like button, subscribe to Virtual Travel by Brian, and ring the notification bell for more informative content. Let's get back into it. Number 5's about to shake things up. Number 5. Brazil. Brazil's economy is like a well-choreographed samba, vibrant, fast-paced, and full of energy. But when the US decides to sit down and skip the dance, Brazil stumbles hard. Why? Because the US is one of Brazil's biggest trading partners, and a recession across the Atlantic means fewer American dollars flowing into Brazil's oil fields, farms, and factories. It's like throwing a huge party and then realizing your guests aren't coming because they just checked their bank accounts. Let's talk about oil first. Brazil is a top oil exporter, and the US is one of its best customers. In 2024, about $5.9 billion worth of Brazilian oil made its way to the US. But when the US hits a recession, guess what people start doing? They stop driving as much, they cut back on fuel consumption, and suddenly, that once reliable demand for oil drops like a bad habit. Brazilian oil producers? They're left holding the barrel, wondering why nobody wants to fill up. Then there's agriculture. Brazil is the world's largest exporter of soybeans, coffee, and sugar. You'd think Brazil's rich farmlands would be a gold mine, but when the US economy contracts, the global market gets shaky. Suddenly, farmers are looking at their crops, wondering who's going to buy them. The US isn't just a big buyer, it's a major player in the global supply chain for Brazil's agriculture. So when American buyers stop picking up Brazil's produce, those crops might as well be left to rot in the fields. And we can't forget about raw materials. Brazil's got a treasure trove of natural resources, from iron ore to gold, which it exports around the world, especially to the US. So when America starts tightening its belts and stops importing as much, Brazil's export sector faces a massive slump. Without the demand, Brazil's economy starts to feel like a flat tire. It'll keep moving, but it won't get very far. So here's the fun part. How long can Brazil's economy keep dancing the samba when its biggest partner isn't even showing up to the party? Not long. With a heavy reliance on the US for oil, agricultural exports, and raw materials, Brazil would see economic instability skyrocket if the US catches a recession bug. Number 4. Germany. Germany is like the well-oiled machine of Europe. It's organized, efficient, and cranks out everything from high-end cars to precision machinery. But here's the kicker. Even the most powerful engines need fuel. And Germany's fuel? The US economy. Without it, the engine sputters, the wheels grind, and the whole thing comes dangerously close to stalling. When the US catches a cold, Germany can expect a full-blown flu. Take German cars, for instance. We're talking about some of the most famous brands in the world. Mercedes-Benz, BMW, Volkswagen. Names that practically scream luxury and performance. The US is one of Germany's biggest car markets. In fact, in 2024, the US bought over 450,000 German-made vehicles. Now imagine that demand dropping off the cliff. Fewer Americans buying expensive cars means less money coming into German car manufacturers. And guess what happens when they stop selling cars? The German auto industry takes a nosedive, and suddenly, those pristine cars look a lot less shiny on the sales lot. Now, what about machinery? Germany's industrial sector is massive, and much of it hinges on the US need for precision engineering. Factories in the US depend on German-made machines, and those machines depend on American demand. You think factories are going to shell out millions for new equipment when the economy is tanking? Not likely. So Germany's machinery sector could face some serious economic turbulence. But wait, there's more. Let's not forget about chemicals. Germany is a world leader in the chemical industry, with its products filling every nook and cranny of American industries. From pharmaceuticals to plastics, if the US is no longer buying, Germany's chemical industry is going to be left twiddling its thumbs, watching all that valuable product sit idle. So what's the bottom line? Germany's economy is incredibly reliant on US demand. A slowdown in American spending would cause German exports to plummet. And when Germany's export-heavy economy stumbles, it's not just about fewer luxury cars being sold. It's about entire industries slowing down, job cuts, and a national economic crisis that no amount of German efficiency can fix. Now, can Germany survive without US demand? Of course, it's resilient, but it's going to feel like driving a car without gas. Things slow down real quick. Number 3. China. China's economy is a powerhouse. It's the world's second largest economy, the factory floor to the world, and a tech giant all rolled into one. But there's one big problem. The US is still a major customer. If the US catches a cold, China doesn't just get a sniffle, it gets knocked flat on its back. Don't believe me? Let's break it down. Electronics. The US is obsessed with gadgets. iPhones, laptops, smart TVs, you name it. And guess who's behind a huge chunk of those gadgets? That's right, China. In 2021, China exported about $127.6 billion worth of electronics to the US alone. But when the US economy tanks, guess what happens? Americans don't need the latest iPhone or the most expensive TV anymore. They start holding onto their old devices, waiting for their next paycheck to buy them. China's electronic giants, Huawei, Xiaomi, Lenovo, would be staring at piles of unsold products while watching their profits evaporate faster than a hot pot of dumplings. But it's not just electronics. Manufacturing is China's bread and butter, too. The US imports everything from clothing to machinery, and a lot of that gear comes straight from Chinese factories. A recession in the US means fewer companies in the US ordering parts, machinery, or even those comfy sweatshirts you love to buy. It's like China spent all this time making the perfect batch of dumplings only to find out that no one's hungry anymore. The factories start slowing down, and millions of workers feel the sting of a shrinking export market. Now, here's the kicker. China has worked hard over the years to reduce its dependence on the US. That's true, but despite all the "let's diversify" speeches, the US still makes up a huge portion of Chinese exports, and the numbers don't lie. In 2024, the US accounted for over 15% of China's total exports. When the US economy slows, China's economy feels it in a big way. It's like that one person who's always telling you how they're going to stop relying on everyone, but still borrows money for lunch every day. So what happens when a recession hits the US? China gets hit with a massive demand drop, slowing its manufacturing sector, and its export market tanks. It's like the entire economic foundation China has built for decades starts crumbling in slow motion. And just like that, China's golden dragon starts feeling more like a sluggish sloth. Think China can weather this storm? Maybe. But it'll be a bumpy ride, and let's be honest, no one likes turbulence when they're used to smooth sailing. Number 2. Canada. Canada's economy is like that friend who's always doing their own thing, but deep down, you know they're secretly reliant on you for everything. And by everything, I mean the US. No, seriously, Canada has spent years pretending to be a self-sufficient powerhouse, but when push comes to shove, it's the US that's keeping the lights on. A US recession? Well, that's like pulling the plug on the whole operation. Take oil. Canada has the third largest oil reserves in the world, and you know who's buying a big chunk of that oil? Yep, it's the good old US. In 2024, the US was responsible for about 90% of Canada's oil exports. So what happens if American demand starts to fall off during a recession? Well, Canada suddenly finds itself sitting on a lot of unsold barrels of oil, wondering where its next paycheck is coming from. No one's showing up to buy, and suddenly that oil money isn't flowing into the Canadian economy. It's like having an all-you-can-eat buffet, but the guests have all decided to go on a diet. And that's not even the worst of it. Let's talk about natural resources. From lumber to precious metals, Canada's economy is like a giant treasure chest full of goodies that the US is more than happy to buy. But when the US goes into a recession, guess who stops shopping for Canadian natural resources? That's right, the US. Suddenly, Canada's resource-rich landscape doesn't seem quite so lucrative. Those timber exports, which are critical to Canadian growth, would take a nosedive, leaving Canadian businesses scrambling to find new customers who are just as willing to buy overpriced wooden furniture and luxury metal products. Now let's talk about something close to every Canadian's heart: tourism. The US is the largest source of international tourists to Canada. In 2024, about 23.4 million Americans visited Canada. That's a whole lot of maple syrup-loving tourists. But when the US hits a recession, those Americans aren't booking flights to the Great White North anymore. Who's going to show up to enjoy the majestic mountains and ice hockey games when they're too busy worrying about their own finances? Canadian tourism? It might as well be stuck in an ice storm with no way out. So let's ask the real question. How long can Canada survive when its economy is this deeply tied to the US? With demand for oil, resources, and tourism taking a nosedive, Canada would feel the impact of a US recession almost immediately. No amount of maple syrup can sweeten that deal. Number 1. Mexico. Mexico's economy is like that over-caffeinated friend who can't seem to function without a double shot of espresso. But instead of coffee, it's the US economy fueling the whole thing. Seriously, Mexico and the US are so connected, it's like they're holding hands on a roller coaster ride. One goes down, and the other is going for a wild ride too. And trust me, if the US enters a recession, Mexico is going to be on that roller coaster screaming, "Why didn't we get off at the last stop?" Let's start with exports. Mexico's bread and butter? Cars, electronics, and agricultural products. The US is Mexico's largest trading partner, absorbing billions of dollars worth of Mexican exports every year. In fact, in 2024, over 84.32% of Mexico's total exports went straight to the US. Think about it. Cars rolling off the assembly lines, electronics flying off shelves, and avocados being shipped faster than you can say guacamole. But when US demand drops, as it does during a recession, all of a sudden, Mexico's export game takes a massive hit. It's like showing up to a potluck with a dish that nobody wants to eat. The cars sit unsold, the gadgets collect dust, and the avocados just rot on the shelves. That's a whole lot of no thanks coming from the north. And don't forget agriculture. Mexico is one of the top exporters of agricultural products to the US. From tomatoes to berries to those delicious avocados, we can't stop stuffing in our guacamole. But guess what happens when US consumers start cutting back? They stop buying as many tomatoes, berries, and avocados. The demand for these products shrinks like your social circle after you tell them you're cutting carbs. Suddenly, Mexico's farmers are staring at fields of crops that aren't going anywhere. And with farming being a critical part of Mexico's economy, that's a huge problem. Then there's the manufacturing sector. A lot of US companies rely on Mexican factories to produce goods, especially in the automotive and electronics industries. But when the US recession hits and Americans stop buying those new cars or fancy gadgets, the demand for Mexican-made goods also drops. That means factories in Mexico start slowing down, workers get laid off, and the whole manufacturing sector begins to buckle under the pressure. It's like a domino effect, where each fallen piece is a little more devastating than the last. So here's the million-dollar question. How long can Mexico keep its economy afloat when its biggest trading partner decides to tighten its belt? A lot of things in Mexico depend on US demand, and without it, things get messy. The export markets slow down, manufacturing jobs dry up, and the agricultural sector just doesn't have enough buyers to keep things rolling. And there you have it. Mexico takes the top spot for a reason. It's deeply dependent on the US and would face a massive economic downturn if the US falls into recession. Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Virtual Travel by Brian for more insights into global economies. And don't forget to drop a comment below on what you think would happen to other countries in this situation. See you in the next video.